Hello, this is Vanguard Tabletop. I'm here to explain how to operate combat encounters in my tabletop RPG, Equal Honor. Let's start with initial contact on page 1 of Combat Rules and Tables. We'll begin by saying that if combat started with all the involved characters being the players and any enemies they're facing in this encounter, and they're all in the ready state, therefore all facing one another, everyone knows everyone is present, everybody in that situation will roll their dexterity, which will just be a 20-sided dice plus the dexterity skill modifier of each of those characters, and whoever rolls the highest will take the first move, and each subsequent number in order from highest to lowest will follow that, ending with the character with the lowest number, and then it'll rotate back to the character with the highest number. Now, if combat is initiated by an action, be it someone attacking or using a spell, and this could be attacking someone who doesn't know that the attacker is present yet, so a sneak attack, if you will, then that will be considered the first turn in the order, and everyone who becomes aware of the attack after that initial contact will then roll their dexterity, and from then on, it will be based on the highest roll to the lowest roll. Another example would be if the entire party makes a sneak attack, then all of them will go first. They will each take a turn striking an enemy, and then once everybody has been attacked, if combat is still going on, then the enemies they attack, assuming they're not dead, will roll their dexterity, and their turns will go in order as before. It isn't mentioned in this page, but it should be assumed that if a sneak attack is occurring, then the victims being attacked should have some form of disadvantage on their defense rolls if they get a defense roll at all. This is more or less dependent on the game master, as this could be very situational, but one possibility would be have them roll their defense twice and take the lower of the two rolls, or you could have some form of subtraction from their defense roll is also a possibility, but given that some circumstances it would be very easy to hit an unsuspecting target, other times might be a little bit harder, whether it be with a ranged weapon or maybe the attackers are already partially visible, but that is up to the game master to choose what they want to do in those specific scenarios. Moving on to the turn cycle, each character is allowed 20 feet or 4 tiles of movement in any clear direction. Now, this is the base movement. Obviously, there might be situations in which characters have either gained more movement speed because of any type of leveling system that the game master includes in their campaign, or there could be enemies, custom enemies that have higher movement speeds. But along with whatever amount of movement the character has, they also are allowed one action, and the action is very important because when it comes to attacking, especially with martial weapons and simple weapons, there's a lot that goes into it. It's kind of the main part of the game that sets it at least somewhat apart. But anyway, an action can be attacking, like I said. This could be using a weapon or casting some form of attack spell, an attack spell being a spell that does damage. Or it could be using an item or casting a non-attack spell, so a spell that doesn't necessarily do any damage or doesn't take a roll to cast. It just gives some form of advantage to the spell user. Also, some weapons need reloading on a turn, such as crossbows and matchlock rifles. Those require an entire turn to reload. Interacting with something also could be considered an action. This could be picking something up, handing an item to another player, or picking up an item, or pulling a lever, simple things like that. Now we'll move on to attack steps. This is where things get a little bit more complicated, especially, like I said, whenever it comes to weapon attacks. Spell attacks are generally pretty simple, unless that's more dependent on the spell itself. But let's start with an attack spell. We'll use an example for that. roll a spell's cast roll versus the target's defense. So some spells, the defense has to be a certain type of defense. It can't just be any defense that the defender wants to use, but that'll be shown on the actual spell's information sheets. But a successful attack roll with most regular spells will resolve in the spell's damage and effects just happening to the targeted enemy, and a failure means that, of course, the spell is avoided or it just doesn't cast. And attacking with a weapon, the first thing you need to do, and this is very important, it's the first thing, is have whoever's attacking target a part of the body that they want to strike whenever they're attacking, of course, a humanoid enemy. And preferably a player or a character or an enemy will target something that is either weakly armored or unarmored entirely. We'll continue on to an example that'll last for the next few pages as well, but starting this example, the player, will say, is attacking the upper leg, and in this example, the target's upper leg will be unarmored. However, they are wearing plate armor on their torso. That'll be important shortly. So you will roll the weapon's attack roll versus their defense roll. Now, this is a section it is written in. It wasn't towards the top in initial contact, but here's an option for sneak attacking. It says that if the target isn't aware or capable of defending against an attack, so maybe the target might not even just be unaware that you're attacking, but might be stuck in something or unable to move, just doesn't have any way of defending, then their defense is just 8 by default, which is super low, very easy to strike over for someone who is proficient with weapon skills, because usually they'll have anywhere between +4 to +8 with their skill in a weapon that they use often. So it's not very hard to beat an 8. So that just kind of makes sense and is an option for you to use if you'd like to. Alright, diving deeper into our example here, we'll use a dagger as our example weapon, and these stats will usually appear in the character sheet if they've written it out completely. They should have all of the stats and everything they need about their weapon in their attack section of the character sheet. Now, moving on from there, this individual attacked using a piercing thrust towards the upper leg, so they'll use the damage type light piercing in this instance. And that'll be, of course, a 20-sided dice roll plus their dexterity modifier. In this case, that will be 6, but it has a debuff of -2. They probably have heavy armor that is reducing their dexterity, so that'll be 4 total, 1d20 plus 4. And in this case, since the weapon has low reach, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage, depending on your distance from the target, of course, you can refer to page 7 if you want to see all of the different weapon reach stats. But what low reach 1 means is that if the attack roll doesn't exceed the defense by at least 1, it will contact the nearest piece of armor. So that is important, because if you aren't that number above the target or the enemy's defense, then it'll hit a piece of armor, which, if the dagger isn't strong enough, it won't pierce that armor and could not do any damage possibly. If, in this case, it's a plate cuirass, which the dagger will not penetrate. If it did penetrate, well, we'll also talk about this in a little bit, but if it did penetrate, then the damage would have the armor stats subtracted from it. We'll use an example of defense here below. This target or enemy, whatever it may be, is going to dodge, so they're going to move out of the way of the attack, and their dodge is 4 because they have +4 dexterity, so that'll be added to their defense roll. However, subtracted from that is 1 because it's minus debuff 1. That probably has something to do with their armor. I think the plate cuirass itself reduces dexterity. So in this case, their dodge will be a 1d20 plus 3. Okay, now we'll talk about the 3 possibilities of an attack. So the results of the attack could be one of 3 things depending on the roll and how high it is above the defense or how low it is below the defense. Now, a major success, that means that it defeated the defense roll by equal to or greater than the reach requirement. So if the attack roll was, say, 12 and the defense ended up being 10, the attack would achieve that low reach requirement. Because, like the dagger says, it is a low reach weapon, and it says low reach 1 because that 1 is the requirement. This means that that attack will land on the targeted upper leg, which in the very beginning of this attack, the player targeted the upper leg, which has no armor. This means that the dagger's damage plus the user's strength is done in full, since it didn't hit any armor or have to penetrate any armor. Now, not all weapons use strength as the damage addition, but many do, and the dagger does as well. In this case, the dagger's damage is 6 plus 5, which is 11 total damage, and all of that damage will be done. And also, this will come up later, but if the target is hit, they will not be able to counterattack or move. Counterattacks and movements are a type of response, but we'll cover that once we get to the last section of this, which is failing to beat the defense roll. But moving on to, this is important. This is the light piercing damage. This is why that's important. So if you're using light piercing damage, it causes bleeding trauma. So that person's upper thigh will now cause them to bleed, and that'll be -1 health every time it gets back to the victim's turn. And that'll happen until they use a bandage on that leg, or there are other methods of healing from that, different items, or possibly spells in the future. Moving on to a partial success, though. This means that the attack roll either was equal to the defense roll, or it didn't reach that low reach 1 requirement. So, a 12, it doesn't, go 1 over the defense, it meets the defense. If the requirement was 2, then, it could also be 13, and it still obviously wouldn't be 2 above the defense of 12. This means that the attack is going to land on the nearest piece of armor instead of the intended target, which was the unarmored upper leg. Now, since that plate cuirass is very close to where the intended target was, it's going to hit that. Like we said before, the dagger can't penetrate plate armor, so no damage is going to be done to that. However, since it's still a hit, the victim won't be able to respond, so they won't be able to counterattack or move 10 feet. That's 2 tiles. So all of the damage is absorbed with the plate cuirass. And I also want to add to this example, if they had, say, armor on their lower leg, then it's possible that the knife would have hit that instead. Maybe it would have pierced that armor, but in this case, it hit plate armor on the person's torso, and it was avoided. If they had plate armor or some form of armor that was immune to light piercing on their shins or their lower legs, then it could hit that, and same deal, all the same. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look at the plate cuirass's stats here. Now these armor stats, as it shows in this example, these stats appear on the body region of the character sheets, so this will be available on the character sheets as well in the actual armor sheet that shows all of it. If you just find this, it'll show all of this information to you. But it's a lot easier if it's just on the character sheet, because that'll be more available whenever you're doing these things. But as you can see, it shows its properties and its immunities, which are the important part here, which it's immune to light hacking, light smashing, heavy slashing, and medium piercing weapons. Okay, so since light piercing is lower than medium piercing, it's immune to that dagger because that was the type of attack that the player was doing. Let's go ahead and move on to if it fails to beat the defense entirely. So in this case, the attack will say it was only 11 and the defense was still 12, so it was lower than the defense. That means the target, in this case, dodges out of the way since they used dodge as their defense. And then this is where it gets really dangerous, and it's the part of fighting that is very dangerous for both parties because both the player and enemies can usually do this, and that's a response, which could be one of two different things. It could be a counterattack, this is the especially dangerous one, or it could be just 10 feet of movement, which is, again, 2 tiles. So the target, after the attack has missed, can just decide to, hey, I'm gonna like move backwards or move to one side a little bit just to kind of gain some distance, or they can do the more aggressive thing, which is counterattack, which means you're gonna just perform a regular old attack back at whoever attacked you. Usually this would be with a melee weapon because it might be close quarters. Could potentially be ranged, probably if both characters were using ranged, but the target of a counterattack has -2 defense. The reason for this is listed below. You have to think that the attacker is, or the original attacker, sorry, is they're, punched out with their weapon, or this would be occurring in the middle of an attack, so they aren't ready to defend like the original victim was. So their defense is reduced in this time. So counterattacks can be very effective in putting someone down. But after a counterattack occurs, if the original attacker and now in this case the defender manages to avoid it, that's all good and well. There's no more counterattacking after that. It just returns to the regular turn cycle. However, if they get hit, then that hit is concluded. Maybe their armor deflects it, or maybe they get hit for damage. But whatever happens, and then the gameplay returns to the turn cycle. Okay, now we're going to talk about armor penetration. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll give a more detailed description of it now. So if a major success occurs against armor that isn't immune to the weapon's damage type, a partial success in accidentally hitting armor that isn't immune would also count. But if this happens, let's say you're using a heavy piercing weapon against that plate armor. So in that case, the armor obviously isn't immune, and the weapon punctures it, and this still deals damage and trauma. However, since the plate cuirass would have an armor value of 10, that would be subtracted from the damage. It shows here 8 plus 5, that's 13 total damage minus 10, only 3 damage. So the plate cuirass definitely helps a lot still. However, because in this example, the weapon used has heavy bleeding trauma, that will still happen. So the character will start bleeding from below that plate armor, and the tables begin below, and it shows what each type of damage causes. And in this case, heavy piercing causes heavy bleeding, which is -3 health every time it goes around to that victim's turn. Slashing also causes different bleeding. It only changes when you get to smashing and hacking. Those cause different traumas that will affect players' stats. Continuing on to the next page, we have a list of different statuses that might occur. These statuses include those that were mentioned in the smashing and hacking damage sections, which is dazed and maimed. Happens on heavy headshots, but on from there are different ones that might just occur based on the environment or based on if fire is involved, be it from a spell or from something as simply burning. As you can see, there's different forms of being trapped, like being stuck in mud. This could also obviously be anything other than mud, just whatever it might be that would reduce your ability to move. And in some of these cases, having heavier armor on makes it harder to get out of. In addition, there's also being grappled. So if somebody's wrapped around you, or if you're restraining somebody's arms, whatever it might be. And then we have a couple of different types of incendiary damage, engulfs being the more large version, which is harder to get out of, and burning is less intense, but also still obviously dangerous. Here are just some more status effects. This comes from different ailments, from being poisoned, diseased, you could be dehydrated, you could be starving. Dehydration and starving can occur whenever you've gone maybe say a full day without using a food ration, and dehydrated, not drinking any fluids. But being poisoned obviously would be some form of active aggression that causes poison damage, and it just lists all the different things that does to you. Dehydration and starving has massive status effects. Now we'll get into weapon reach, which we touched on with the dagger example. It had low reach, so it only took 1 to get in a major excess, one above the target's defense. It shows kind of a reiteration of that example in the square on the right there. But now we move on to things like medium reach, which reaches a little bit further, in the sense that it's a full tile of reach, whereas the dagger, you kind of have to be right up on someone, basically sharing a tile. But then with a medium reach weapon, you also likely have a stronger weapon. And then on from there, long reach, you probably also have an even stronger weapon. It just requires an even higher roll to get a major success, and strike the body part that's meant to be attacked. And then you have great reach, so long pole arms such as pikes can reach 2 tiles, but it takes a lot to get major success with stuff at this size and over. And if you're kind of confused on why this is, it's not only for a balancing thing, but thinking about it logically, is when you're controlling something like, let's compare a dagger to a pike. A dagger, you're controlling it with one hand, it's really close to you, not very much extension, so you have good leverage, you have good aim, and so the advantage of that is you're more likely to hit something you want to hit, which might be completely unarmored. Whereas if you're trying to poke with a long stick like a pike, it's a little bit more difficult to hit exactly where you want. However, you got that extra reach, and you possibly got extra power behind that thrust. So you really need to weigh what you want to be fighting with, especially whenever you have identified what type of armor they're wearing. If they don't have much armor, well, pretty much good to probably go for a super strong weapon, and just you're more likely to hit them somewhere that isn't protected anyway, or you're more likely to hit them somewhere where you penetrate their armor and deal a decent amount of damage still with a great reach weapon. But let's say you're in a close fight with somebody with really heavy armor, but you've identified a gap in that armor. Might be more effective to go with the dagger, because you might be able to reach that unarmored spot and deal more damage because you're not punching through super heavy armor, or maybe you're not hitting something that is immune to what you're using anyway. But moving on from that spot, we also have exceptional reach, which is a crazy long weapon. I can't remember off the top of my head which melee weapons reach this amount. I could have been wrong on that pike. Maybe the pike is exceptional reach, but anyway, same deal with that. But moving on from there is our ranges. Ranges are a little bit different than reach, because they are referring to a throwable or shootable weapon, such as a bow, or using some sort of thrown object, or rock, or knife. And that also gives you the amount of tiles it launches, and the required roll for a major success also kind of resets back to a lower number, because now it's all about you being accurate from a distance. It isn't about controlling or leveraging a weapon. Just the farther that distance is, the harder it is to make that perfect shot. There's also some very powerful long-range weapons that can penetrate a decent amount of armor too. But But yeah, that pretty much concludes our combat rules and tables. Thank you for listening, and I hope that if you're listening to this, that you're gonna try and play, and I hope you enjoy it. I know that especially the weapon attacks are very complex, but the relationship of the weapons and the armor is very important to the game, and it's the defining factor of the combat. And if you don't want it to be that complicated, then just maybe don't worry about things like trauma. Don't worry about that. Maybe don't worry about certain aspects of the rules. Just play it to enjoy it and play it in the way that you like to play it. Not all the rules are set in stone. They're just if you want a very authentic armored fighting type of gameplay that I tried to bring to the tabletop arena. And again, I just hope you enjoy, and thanks for watching this video.